Tensions in Haiti were rising on Saturday. This is over the lack of aid to remote areas hardest hit by last week's devastating earthquake. It killed more than 2,000 people. Rescue workers had to battle with armed gangs in Haiti to deliver aid to those suffering after a 7.2 magnitude earthquake. Now, aid convoys were attacked, and the UN Office for Humanitarian Affairs was forced to negotiate with the gangs that allowed the aid to be passed through. Now, Haitians are desperate for supplies like medical, food and sanitation, as well as support. Reports say an aid truck was looted. Now, to tell us more about the situation in the country, we are joined by Pina. He is with the Haiti Info Project. Kevin, good morning to you. Thank you for your time this morning. Just paint us a picture of what seems to be ever more turning into a public health crisis in Haiti.
Well, it is an aid emergency that has failed miserably, largely initially because of the lack of infrastructure inside of the country due to 10 years of corrupt administration, the PHTK ruling party, which began with Michel Martelly, and then, of course, he assassinated President Jovenel Moise. This earthquake struck, after a government in disarray, and of course, largely this is due to the interventions of the international community to begin with. The 2004 coup, which left Haiti, destroyed Haiti's democratic institution, and Haiti has never recovered from it. So in many ways, it's ironic that now the United Nations finds itself battling gangs which were allied with the same PHTK ruling party government. It's no secret that they used some of those gangs against protesters. The government of Jovenel Moise had brought in mercenaries, and we know that ultimately he was himself apparently killed by Colombian mercenaries. So it's not surprising that the UN, going through the area of Matissan, where these gangs have run roughshod and terrorized communities on behalf of the government, are now coming back to bite them. Let's also remember that most of the aid that has been getting into the region has been coming through the port in Jérémie. So certainly there are other options for the United Nations, and the main road, Route Nationale 2, Route National number 2, is actually blocked in several locations, not allowing passage to Okai. So apparently what they were also trying to do was to get to those areas, I guess, to begin to get in earth-moving equipment to also clear some of that debris that is blocking and has destroyed the roads there.
I mean, these gangs, I would assume that they're also affected by this 7.2 magnitude earthquake. Why would they be cutting their nose off to spite their face at the moment?
Well, the capital remains largely unaffected. This happened in the south of Haiti. And it's very different than when the earthquake struck Port-au-Prince in 2010 and was centered mainly around the capital, where, of course, there are adequate ports in order to land large barges and ships with aid, and of course, a large tarmac at the Toussaint-Louverture International Airport. The same thing cannot be said for the south, spread out over a large region all the way from Mont-Saint-Nicolas in the west all the way to the east. Entire communities such as Pestel destroyed, Camperin nearly completely destroyed, just utter destruction. And of course, as you said, more than 2,000, and we expect the death toll to continue rising because really there's not been an adequate relief effort mounted. But nor have the police and the local authorities in Jérémie and in Okai really helped the population either. And when they have helped the population, we've seen that they're actually using it as an opportunity to electioneer. We're seeing matchbooks going in with people who are expected to be candidates for the next U.S.-sponsored elections, showing up bottles of water with their pictures on them. And, of course, none of these are things that people really need. What they really need is shelter. You know, that Tropical Storm Grace had passed through there, and just horrific images of children and women under torn plastic sheets in the wind, in the rain, standing in ankle deep in mud with children crying and hungry. Just an awful situation. However, I do have to say that many of the local communities have also come together and have begun to do their own aid, Haitian to Haitian aid, which has been very inspiring. But they, too, have been threatened by government-allied gangs. And quite honestly, I'm still trying to figure this one out. They're actually afraid of the foreign aid agencies as well, because they feel as if they're somehow collaborating with the local government, and that the local government has inappropriate attachments to those same gangs. It's a very difficult situation.
I mean, it's very difficult. 30,000 families left homeless as a result as well. You mentioned the fact that there's a tropical storm that has hit the country, and as a result, people still fear the aftershock, and they're sleeping in the streets, according to what I'm reading. Is that the case at the moment?
They're afraid, yes, they're very much afraid. And, of course, structures have been weakened as a result of the earthquake, and it's very difficult. It's traumatic, of course, for the population as a whole. But even more traumatic, I believe, is, the violence is also occurring. And largely, again, it's because of corruption. We also have reports that, for example, 2 large ships had docked 2 days ago in Jeremy. Jeremy has a very large wharf. These were 2 large ships that were containing sacks of rice and beans and cooking oil and tomato paste. And while some of it did get where it was intended, a good portion of it ended up nearly 6 hours later being sold in the markets, and not just by people who received it. These were large amounts that were showing up, as much as 20 kilometers away, being sold in local markets. So people don't have tents. People who are stronger prey upon the weak. But again, there are some shining beacons of hope, and it's largely those Haitian organizations from the capital and those Haitian peasant organizations in the countryside that are actually pulling together food, pulling together stocks of medicine. We've seen amazing efforts on their part to pull makeshift clinics together. And when you see Haitians helping Haitians that way, and it's just an extraordinary thing.
I mean, how much does the Prime Minister have to do, because obviously you mentioned the fact that the gangs are government allied. Surely he should be coming out and protecting his people, as he does have a job to do, and that is sort of his mandate.
Well, he's very politically weak, and the police department, despite being U.S. and Canadian trained for since 2004, have been corrupt. They've been the ones who, on behalf of members of the government, have been found to work with gangs, to fund gangs, and to use gangs against protesters, against the opposition in Haiti. So he doesn't have much credibility. He had very little credibility coming into office. He has far less now because of the lack of response. But also remember, this is a prime minister who just 2 days ago we found out that one of the people who were the principal suspects in the killing of the president, that he had spoken to the night that the president was killed. And that's getting around Haiti, and that's not helping his political credibility whatsoever. So it is a situation that can be traced back to the coup of 2004 again, the destruction of Haiti's democratic institutions, which have never recovered. And that was followed by 10 years of the PHTK ruling party, which I think that there's been adequate evidence that if you do your own research, you can see that there have been cases made by government institutions themselves of corruption, endemic institutionalized corruption within that party. And so they could not be expected to mount a legitimate rescue and recovery effort, unfortunately.
Kevin, I mean, Haiti is, the poorest nation in the Americas. It's not...
Not really, my friend.
Isn't it?
Haiti's extraordinarily mineral wealth, extraordinary. The only difference is that the people have been kept purposefully poor because it's run by a small oligarchy which controls over 80% of that economy. And they're able to continue to do that because of the large amounts of money that they pay to Washington lobbyists on K Street. And that also is well documented. So Haitian corruption is also very much intermingled with corruption within the U.S. as well, within the U.S. political system as well. Haiti is not poor. It is mineral rich. It has much wealth, but that wealth has never been allowed to be used for the benefit of the majority of its people. And
I mean, that speaks to the disappointment with its relief efforts. Haiti is not, it's prone to natural disasters. We've seen earthquakes, we've seen hurricanes pass through. And as a result of these natural disasters, cholera also then becomes a problem. Another big worry.
No, let's be clear. There was never an incident of cholera for nearly 50 years. It was the United Nations that brought cholera and the cholera epidemic that took the lives of nearly 10,000 Haitians. They were the ones who brought the cholera epidemic to Haiti.
And this is why then the Haiti residents would then be afraid of the United Nations aid, Kevin.
Well, that's one other reason. Plus, as I said, the United Nations and the leading countries within the United Nations after the 2004 coup, mainly the United States, France, and Canada, said they were going to rebuild Haiti after they destroyed its democratic institutions. They took responsibility for training the police. They took responsibility for training the judiciary, the judges. And today, Haiti has one of the most corrupt judiciaries in the entire hemisphere. And certainly, its police has been found to be utterly lacking and corrupt as well. So that all goes back to them too. And you know the old saying, if you bought it, you broke. If you broke it, you bought it.
Massive human rights violations, though, it seems. Then, if everything that you're saying is true, how do Haiti's people even start to emerge from this on the other side with half the dignity that they should have?
Well, they're certainly not going to solve this problem by rushing into new U.S.-sponsored or foreign-sponsored elections. They need time to recover their institutions. They need time to come to a resolution amongst themselves in order to build a government of national reconciliation that everyone trusts, that everyone has confidence in, that then can create and appoint a new election council which will result in true democratic elections that will truly benefit stability in the region, stability in Haiti, and ultimately the people of Haiti themselves.
Kevin Pina, thank you so much for your time.